Hello everyone, and welcome to this new video. Today we're talking about Ubuntu 25.10 Questing Quokka, released on October 9th, 2025, with support until July 2026. I need to make a necessary disclaimer since those who follow this channel know how I feel about Ubuntu, and my judgment is far from positive. In fact, it's very negative, and it's a strongly ideological, principled judgment. The direction Ubuntu has taken for a long time and continues to pursue like a speeding train goes against everything I believe regarding technology and open source. This doesn't change the fact that I am capable of evaluating a distribution technically and objectively, setting aside ideological content, and that's exactly what I'll do in this review. So yes, I'll assume a more professional and detached tone, trying to look at Ubuntu 25.10 from outside my perspective, as if I were a genuine Windows user who wants to switch to Linux and knows little about Linux and what it represents, caring equally little about it. So yes, if you're watching this video, know that the Linux ecosystem offers much better alternatives, but I can't deny that Ubuntu has assumed a precise and very attractive identity, especially for those coming from outside our community. That said, I recognize first and foremost that this release is one of the most groundbreaking of Canonical's last decade. Yes, it's a true revolution aimed at innovation and extreme push toward disruptive technical choices. Ubuntu 25.10 indeed brings some of the most radical changes in recent years. Wayland-only for GNOME, definitive goodbye to X11, completely changed default applications, and especially a transition toward tools written in Rust that replace historic Linux system components. But it doesn't end there. We have GNOME 49, Kernel 6.17, a new intermef system, advanced enterprise features, and even experimental RISC-V desktop support. It's an Ubuntu that decidedly looks to the future, while maintaining that solidity and usability that made it the world's most popular Linux distribution. Let's start immediately with the most revolutionary changes, because Ubuntu 25.10 is truly serious about system modernization. First bombshell, GNOME becomes Wayland-only. No more Ubuntu on Xorg option in the login screen. X-Wayland remains for legacy applications, but the native X11 session completely disappears. Ubuntu follows Fedora in this courageous choice, but for Ubuntu it's even more significant given its mainstream user base. Second revolution, sudo-rs in Rust replaces sudo. The sudo command you've always used, written in C for decades, is replaced by a modern version written in Rust. The old sudo.us remains available via update alternatives if you have problems, but the default is the Rust version. Third shocking news, Rust core utils as default. The system's basic commands, ls, cp, mv, cat, and all others, are no longer the historic new core utils, but versions rewritten in Rust. Here too there's fallback to GNU if you find incompatibilities, but the system points toward Rust. These are not minor choices. Here we're talking about one of the hearts of the free software world. Sudo has accompanied Linux's growth for more than 30 years, becoming a symbolic component. Replacing it with the Rust equivalent is more about chasing a trend, an identity, than seeking real benefits. If the intent was to deal with user security, well, they could have taken inspiration from Fedora and its default settings. Moreover, I believe that a tool tested over decades is hardly surpassable by something new, even if written in Rust. Let me elaborate here because people often speak from factions, ignoring basic things to wave the banner of the moment at all costs, and in this case, Rust. Padraig Brady, one of the main maintainers of new core utils, has a very pragmatic vision on the Rust question. His position is essentially this. Sure, Rust is an interesting language with its security guarantees, but rewriting 40 years of code that works perfectly in production just to solve bugs that are more theoretical than practical, and that we already know how to avoid anyway, simply makes no sense from an economic and engineering standpoint. The practical considerations speak clearly. GNU core utils literally process trillions of files every day on servers worldwide without causing significant problems. When vulnerabilities emerge, the community is extremely reactive in releasing fixes quickly. The code is constantly subjected to automated fuzzing to uncover potential problems, and there's a very active community of developers and users who immediately report any anomalies. From GNU's perspective, what many call the Rust revolution appears more like a technological trend than a real necessity. Sure, projects like UUtils exist that re-implement core utils in Rust, but the reality is that these implementations are not yet completely production-ready. They're still missing many particular edge cases and obscure flags that GNU versions have supported for years. Performance isn't always better than optimized C code, and most importantly, there's still no complete guarantee of binary compatibility with all existing scripts and systems that depend on the precise behavior of traditional core utils. And it doesn't end there. New default applications. Petixis replaces GNOME Terminal as the default terminal, and Loop takes the place of Eye of GNOME for viewing images. Ubuntu is truly renewing the entire application ecosystem. On the technical front, Dracute becomes default for generating initrans instead of initrans tools. If you upgrade from previous versions, you stay as before, but new installations use Dracute. APT obviously remains Ubuntu's package manager, but benefits from all improvements in the upstream Debian ecosystem. With the more modern base stack, package management is more efficient. Snap integration remains strong, and the Flatpak experience is improved for those who prefer this option. Ubuntu Software Center has been optimized to better handle all three package formats. An interesting novelty is better support for third-party repositories, with enhanced security controls and smarter management of signing keys. The Snap Store and forced integration in some cases limit choice and customization compared to pure Flatpak apt. The Rust-first imprint on historic components can seem trendy, if not accompanied by total compatibility. And Ubuntu, in attempting to build a coherent commercial ecosystem, tends to distance itself from community ethos. These are positions that many share and others contest. I consider them real criticisms, and I emphasize them here without having to repeat them later. Ubuntu 25.10 maintains the broadest software ecosystem in the Linux desktop world. Between main universe repositories, official Snap Store, and Flatpak, you find practically any existing software. The novelty is that many packages are now more updated thanks to improved synchronization with Debian. The time gap between upstream release and availability in Ubuntu has reduced significantly. For developers, the inclusion of OpenJDK 25 LTS, .NET 10 RC, and preview of Zig.141 compiler makes Ubuntu 20.10 an extremely modern development platform. We also have GCC 15 and LLVM Clang 21 available, although defaults remain GCC 14 and LLVM 20. Ubuntu 25.10 arrives with Linux kernel 6.17 as official target. It's an aggressive choice. The kernel is so recent, it might still be RC at freeze time, but Canonical always aims for the most recent available. This is truly one of those significant decisions that put Ubuntu among cutting-edge distributions, but at what price? It seems like a too aggressive choice, I'd say outright exaggerated, and considering this is a stable non-rolling distribution oriented also and especially toward businesses and production, I find it too risky. Kernel 6.17 brings extended hardware support, significant performance optimizations, and all the latest security features. For very new hardware, Ubuntu is often the first mainstream distribution to support it completely. There's also specific work to improve VRR, variable refresh rate in Mutter, excellent for gaming and high-frequency monitors. The Ubuntu installer receives significant updates, especially on enterprise and security fronts. The most interesting novelty is TPM-backed full disk encryption as an improved experimental option. Now you have more intuitive recovery key management, additional controls, pin support, and warnings before firmware updates. It also works with proprietary NVIDIA drivers thanks to specific installer integrations. For business environments, there's integration with Landscape to download auto-install profiles, and device registration to Microsoft Entra ID with policy enforcement. Ubuntu increasingly positions itself as a serious alternative to Windows in corporate environments. The installer and its graphics is the most polished in the entire Linux landscape. You breathe professionalism, and from a marketing standpoint, Ubuntu is unsurpassed by anyone here. Once installed, Ubuntu 25.10 greets you with an updated GNOME 49 desktop and a very fluid native Wayland experience. Compared to the X11 session, the differences are subtle, perhaps a bit more smoothness, but full compatibility with all existing applications is still not there. The new default applications, Ptixis and Loop, are modern and well integrated. Ptixis is faster and more configurable than GNOME Terminal, with many more features, while Loop is lighter and more responsive for image viewing. The transition to sudo in Rust is completely transparent for normal users. GNOME customization is state-of-the-art. I find it very polished. Ubuntu's own dock and carefully designed theme make for an excellent overall look. I only encountered a few minor issues, such as bugs in the Bluetooth module, small annoyances, but nothing critical. Where Ubuntu truly shines is in its initial onboarding experience. The graphical first-run setup is one of the best in the Linux world. Clear tutorials, contextual suggestions, cloud service integration, and account synchronization. Combined with official documentation that is above average in quality, coverage, and updates, this drastically lowers the learning curve for newcomers coming from Windows or Mac OS. Ubuntu 25.10 has enhanced collaboration with NVIDIA for the Wayland experience. Proprietary drivers work much better on Wayland compared to previous versions, especially with 550+ series. Installation remains the classic Ubuntu approach, either through software and updates or via Ubuntu drivers auto-install. TPM integration for secure boot is improved for proprietary drivers. Gaming benefits greatly from all the novelties: Kernel 6.17 for optimal hardware support, native Wayland for better performance, VRR for gaming monitors, and improved NVIDIA drivers. Steam works perfectly through X-Wayland, and many native games already support Wayland. Proton and Steam Deck compatibility are excellent, especially thanks to the very recent kernel. The only aspect to consider is some very old games that might have problems without native X11, but this is an increasingly smaller percentage of the catalog. Ubuntu has always had an excellent reputation regarding security, and with 25.10 takes a theoretical step forward. The transition to sudo-rs in Rust and introduction of Rust core utils clearly show the willingness to offer a more secure system. What disturbs me, though, is not having really pushed beyond on default settings to make the desktop average user-proof. On this, Fedora remains an excellent example. In practice, no firewall active by default, no AppArmor really enabled and well profiled. Here, this is precisely where Ubuntu could have dared much more. TPM-backed FDE adds a hardware protection layer, and enterprise integration with Microsoft Entra ID brings enterprise-level security controls. Security updates remain extremely fast thanks to Ubuntu's consolidated process, and Kernel 6.17 includes all the latest hardware mitigations for vulnerabilities like Spectre Meltdown. I remind that AppArmor is not configured to be active and vigilant. It must be done manually. Ubuntu 25.10 focuses heavily on the enterprise market. Integration with Landscape and Microsoft Entra ID makes managing business fleets much simpler. Support for centralized policies and automated deployments is enterprise level. From an architecture standpoint, important news: RISC-V support with RVA23 baseline. For now, mainly via QEMU, but it's a clear signal that Ubuntu is preparing for the post-x86 future. For Raspberry Pi, they introduce AB boot layout that increases boot update reliability, important for embedded and IoT devices. Another concrete strength: proprietary official enterprise tools, Landscape for fleet management, integrations with Entra ID Active Directory, auto-install profiles, don't have such integrated equivalents elsewhere. For those administering dozens or hundreds of machines, this means saved time and more predictable processes. Being a release with such profound changes, there could be some edge cases to resolve. The transition to Wayland-only might cause issues with certain proprietary applications or programs that are not yet fully supported. There have already been reports of malfunctions with remote desktop clients such as Remina, along with other complaints related to this technical choice. The switch to sudo-rs is designed to be transparent, and if you encounter problems, there is always a fallback to the traditional tool via update alternatives. However, keep in mind that even though sudo-rs is intended as a drop-in replacement, some features of the traditional sudo are not yet fully implemented, such as sudo edit, complete no-exec support, or integration with C-Linux and other restricted environments. For migration from Ubuntu 25.10, the process should be smooth through a normal system upgrade. Ubuntu has one of the most reliable upgrade systems in the Linux world. Ubuntu 25.10 is perfect for those who want modernity without losing Ubuntu's typical usability. If you appreciate innovations but want a distribution that just works, it's ideal. It's excellent for mainstream users who want a modern and secure system, for companies that need enterprise integration, and for developers who want updated toolchains on a stable base. Ubuntu ultimately is not Linux. It's detaching and completely distancing itself from our ecosystem, both from a technical and especially ideological standpoint. Ubuntu is an attempt to make Linux desktop commercial. I don't judge the goal, but the methods don't seem convincing to me. I find this distribution perfect for large corporate companies or SMEs or developers or users who prefer proprietary software. The general behavior remains Ubuntu's usual, easy to use, well documented, with excellent support. The new features modernize the system without disrupting the consolidated user experience. The native Wayland experience is acceptable, perhaps a bit smoother, but it could also lead to incompatibilities and issues. Sudo-rs works more or less like the traditional sudo in appearance. Enterprise integration is at a professional level. The theme and overall look are excellent. In short, saying Ubuntu doesn't work would be unfair. I used this distribution for months and had a normal experience, but I must repeat, there's an increasingly strong feeling of using something different from Linux, if you'll allow the term. Snap applications start noticeably slower, take up more space, and sometimes feel less integrated. Compared to the past, I noticed significant slowness and resource usage, especially during updates, along with some minor bugs and a few freezes, all manageable, but still present. I've tried countless distributions, but for a newcomer approaching Linux, this is absolutely not perceived. Since Ubuntu is often seen as the benchmark for Linux, that perception can be misleading. The overall experience is that of a mass-market commercial product, polished but not perfect. I would say we are looking at a transitional release, where a lot of experimentation is happening, and compared to Fedora, you can really feel that difference. Ubuntu with 25.10 demonstrates it hasn't lost the ability to innovate. The transition toward Rust for core components is courageous and forward-looking. Improved enterprise support shows the willingness to compete seriously in the business market. It's interesting to see how Ubuntu balances innovation and usability. Radical changes under the hood, but user experience that remains familiar and accessible. Ubuntu is building its ecosystem, and this is a decade-long attempt by Canonical. If they don't succeed with big projects like Unity, they succeed with other technical choices, customizations, support offerings with Ubuntu Pro that's currently free, a proprietary app store, a whole series of tools that integrate well with the Windows ecosystem, maniacal care for graphic details. Ubuntu 25.10 is an extreme release, significant innovations that look to Canonical's future, but still maintaining the works for everyone philosophy that made Ubuntu the most popular Linux distribution. If you want a modern, secure, and well-supported system without having to give up usability, this version 25.10 is an excellent choice. But it's an egocentric system where the Linux experience is partly crippled by questionable commercial and technical choices, as I've extensively covered on my channel. Critical aspects are mainly related to Wayland-only. some applications might have problems. The transition to Rust, though well managed, could create incompatibilities in specific edge cases. I've already mentioned Snap, and I don't retract it. Support of only 9 months means you'll have to update relatively soon if you don't want to move to the next LTS. Here, it seems to me that Canonical focuses mainly on LTS versions, giving these intermediate versions more the aspect of a beta than final releases. Reduced support, extreme choice of RC kernel, everything suggests that intermediate releases are the ground where many risks test changes toward more definitive LTS versions. Ubuntu 25.10 is a revolution, but also an intelligent evolution from the perspective of a company trying every way to make Linux desktop profitable. If Canonical takes the best innovations from the Linux world and makes them accessible to everyone, on the other hand, it implements a very commercial project vision and software distribution and adoption choices, where you're less users and more customers, companies, support, attention to detail, integrations with Docker tools, servers, and Windows, deep and excellent graphic customization, centralized store. In short, something conceptually different in the entire Linux distribution landscape. In my months-long test on the major 5 mainstream distributions, allow me the term, Debian, OpenSUSE, Fedora, Mint, and indeed Ubuntu, the latter overall remains slightly behind, and what weighs is especially the Snap choice, which, ideologies aside, is technically inferior. Flatpak is becoming the de facto standard, especially for the GTK and GNOME ecosystem. I appreciate the idea of wanting to distance from it. What I less appreciate is doing it with a proprietary centralization concept that goes against all open-source world principles. Having said all this, if you seek innovation without complications, if you want advanced and available Docker and server tools, Ubuntu 25.10 questing Quokka is what you need. But think about it 100 times. Better alternatives exist, and Ubuntu is not Linux, it's just a Linux distribution.